friends, welcome back to Beautifully Bookish Bethany, where I have new videos every week about books and the geeky mom lifestyle. Subscribe for more bookish videos and hit that notification bell if you want to be notified every time I release a new video. In today's video, I'm going to be sharing with you 15 of my favorite TV shows and books that I would pair with those shows if you are also a fan of them. Many of you, especially if you've watched my How to Read More videos, probably know that I don't watch a whole lot of television. Like a couple hours a week is pretty typical for me. However, I do watch some and I have some shows that I really enjoy, so I thought it would be fun to do a video where I recommend books to you by also sharing some of my favorite television shows. I have this divided up into two categories. First up, I have 5 current favorites. These are shows that are still on air, still being produced. Then I have 10 classics. These are TV shows that will never get old, at least for me. And for each TV show, I'm going to recommend to you a book that has some similarities. Let's go ahead and get started with my 5 current faves. First up, a Netflix show that I have been really loving is Never Have I Ever, and I am thrilled that this got renewed for a second season because I kind of blew through these. They are like candy, they made me laugh. I just thought the show was so great. So when I was looking for a book comparison title, I was trying to think of something where it's comedic, at least some of the time. You have a main character who's pretty chaotic and has problems with their love life, and is straddling 2 worlds culturally. So a book that I think is a great comparison for this is Frankly in Love by David Yoon. This is a YA debut novel that came out last year that I really enjoyed. It definitely has moments of humor, and the main character is a Korean American boy who's trying to figure out what to do about liking a white girl when his traditional Korean parents want him to end up with somebody else. So this one is definitely a coming of age story and deals with deeper issues, which Never Have I Ever does as well. So if you liked Never Have I Ever, maybe check out Frankly in Love. Another big favorite is The Walking Dead, which is wild. We are 10 seasons in. I'll admit I am not caught up. I have 2 episodes left of season 9, which is on Netflix, and then once we get season 10 on Netflix, I will be watching it there. And what's interesting is after season 8, I was really tempted to give up. I was like, I don't know, it's not as good as the first few seasons were. And then man, season 9, I feel like it's really redeemed itself. It kind of took an interesting turn and introduced new characters, and I think having a time jump happen was really helpful with that. All that to say, I'm a huge fan of The Walking Dead. I would not have thought I would be a huge fan of it because it's not like I love zombie stuff, but this show is really not about the zombies. It's about the human relationships, and it's about trying to rebuild a society and figure out what humanity means after this kind of global devastation, and I find those things to be super interesting. Plus, like, Michonne is such a badass. Yeah, definitely a Walking Dead fan. We've been watching it for years now, and the book that I wanted to share for this one is a fun one. This is Girls Save the World in this one by Ash Parsons. So this is a YA book that came out this year, which is basically Walking Dead plus Comic-Con, which is just so much fun. I really, really loved this. It follows a group of teen girls who are going to their very first ZombieCon convention. They're big fans of this Walking Dead type TV show. And while they're there at the convention center, a real zombie outbreak occurs. It's very over the top, but so much fun, and if you like The Walking Dead, you'll probably get a kick out of this, and especially if you've been a part of The Walking Dead fandom or gone to comic conventions like New York City Comic-Con or San Diego Comic-Con and seen how people respond to that. It captures it so well here, so I thought this was a really good time, and I think it's a good fit if you are a fan of The Walking Dead, like I am. My next current favorite is an Amazon original. This is The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. This is so much fun, especially the first couple of seasons. I found this to be just laugh out loud funny. Set in New York City in the late 1950s, early 1960s, and it follows a Jewish woman living in Upper Manhattan who has recently found out that her husband is cheating on her. She asks for a divorce, and even though she's the mother of 2 children, ends up deciding to start a comedy career. And it's just so good. The characters are fantastic. The storylines are really interesting. There's so many comedic moments. This is one that I find to be really, really entertaining, and I loved it. And so for thinking about a read-alike title, I wanted something that was relatively modern American history, following a woman who was subverting gender expectations, because I think that's a lot of what Mrs. Maisel is about. And so if you like The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, I would recommend checking out City of Girls by Elizabeth Gilbert. This one is set a little bit earlier during World War II, but also in New York City, and it follows a young woman who goes to New York for the first time, trying to figure out who she is and what she wants, getting drawn into a life of partying with showgirls and exploring her sexuality, and ends up definitely doing things that subvert gender norms, especially of the time. The cool thing about City of Girls is it's told from the main character's perspective when she's an old woman, which I think adds a lot of really valuable and needed context and insight that you otherwise might not have gotten if you were in her head at the time it was all happening. So I thought this was really great. It also is one that tackles issues like race and homophobia, which The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel has been tackling as well. So if you like The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, I would recommend checking out City of Girls. My next favorite currently running TV show is one that I'm sure I share with a lot of other people, and that is Queer Eye. Who doesn't love the Fab Five? This, for me, is the ultimate feel-good content. If I need something happy that will make me feel good about myself and feel good about life, I will watch an episode of Queer Eye. I love how they bring out the best in people and help them to see that in themselves. And this transformation is more than just an external thing. It's really about internal growth, confronting your demons, stepping out of your comfort zone, and finding your possibilities. The book that I chose to go along with Queer Eye is One Summer in Paris by Sarah Morgan. I love Sarah Morgan because she writes fantastic characters, but I thought that this book in particular was a really good fit. It's a dual perspective book, but one of the two main characters is a middle-aged woman who right before her 25th wedding anniversary discovers that her husband has been cheating on her. And so she decides to go by herself on this surprise anniversary trip she had planned to Paris. And while she's there, kind of rediscovers herself and experiences a transformation that is both internal and external. And I loved it. I think this is a really great book, and it just seemed like a great fit for Queer Eye. So if you too are a fan of the show Queer Eye, and one of the things that you like about it is that sort of personal transformation piece, then you might want to try One Summer in Paris by Sarah Morgan. And the last of my current favorites that I want to recommend a book for today is The Witcher. Now, I could be really simple and recommend that you read The Last Wish by Andrzej Sapkowski, which is a short story collection that begins the Witcher series, but I'm not going to do that. Obviously, in a lot of these recommendation videos I do for movies, for TV shows, often you have something that is based on a book. But what I'm trying to do is not just give you the most obvious recommendation, but try to think about what are some of the elements that I really love about that thing and recommend something similar. So thinking about The Witcher, what's interesting is we have a main character who's kind of an anti-hero. He's not good all the time, but he's not exactly a villain either. He's a complicated character. He's traveling throughout this epic fantasy world and doing different things, and there's magic and there's battles. And so the book that I want to recommend for this one is The Unspoken Name by A.K. Larkwood. I really enjoyed this. This is a book, though, that seems to get mixed reviews. I understand that it's not really for everyone. The pacing is a little bit slow and can be kind of choppy, but I kind of loved this. I loved the world, I loved the characters, I thought it was really, really interesting. So the main character in this book is Sorwe. She's an orc born to this kind of cultish religious organization, raised to be the sacrificial bride of her god. But on the day that she's destined to die as this sacrificial bride, she instead decides to run away and become an assassin. And then a lot of other things happen. There's a lot of traveling, there's a lot of different court politics and intrigue. There's a very low-key, slow burn female-female romance that develops. I just really enjoyed this. I thought it was great, and I think if you like The Witcher, it's worth a try. So those are 5 of my favorite currently running shows. Let's go ahead and move on to my 10 favorite shows that are no longer running, but will always have a special place in my heart and are things that I will probably continue to rewatch over the years. First up is Buffy the Vampire Vampire Slayer. So I really love this show, but I'm also super late to the game. My parents were very conservative when I was growing up, and so this was not a show I was allowed to watch when it was on air, even though a lot of my friends watched it while it was on air. I'm not bitter. So actually I ended up watching Buffy and Angel for the first time when I was pregnant with my first son and then nursing him, because I was like up all night practically. And when I had newborns, I just stream a lot of television shows. And so Buffy and Angel were what I watched with my first son, and it was great. At the time, they were available streaming on Amazon, and I just like binged them in a few months, and it was awesome. So if you also like Buffy, I'm gonna recommend you try Sawkill Girls by Clare Legrand. This is feminist YA horror, and I loved it. It's definitely got some like scary and disturbing content, so if you need those kind of content warnings, or if horror is not your cup of tea, then do be aware of this, but I think it is fantastic. It takes place on this island called Sawkill Rock, where something evil seems to be kidnapping and murdering girls. And this follows 3 teen girls as they deal with this evil thing on the island. It's definitely got some Buffy the Vampire Slayer vibes. Also, if you were looking for queer representation, there's lots of it in here. One of the girls is asexual, one of them is a lesbian, and one of them is bisexual, and there is a female-female romance that develops with an on-the-page sex scene, which is super unusual to find in YA, especially between girls. So, if you want some Buffy the Vampire Slayer with a side of horror, go check out Sawkill Girls by Clare Legrand. So if I streamed Buffy and Angel when I had my first son, when I had my second one, it was Gilmore Girls and Gossip Girl, both of which are also on this list. So first up, let's talk about Gilmore Girls. Who doesn't love Gilmore Girls? Okay, I know there are people who don't love it, but I love it. And of course, one of the central pieces, beyond all of the friendships and the quirky town members and all the love interests where everybody likes to debate who was the best one, Logan, guys. It was clearly Logan. But beyond all that, the central relationship here is really between Rory and Lorelai. And they just have the best relationship with witty banter, but things are sometimes complicated. And so I was like, what would be a good book for this? Because I knew if there was gonna be a good book to compare to Gilmore Girls, it had to have that central parent-child relationship with that level of banter. You would be surprised at how hard that actually is to find, especially in YA novels where they like to kind of get rid of the parents most of the time. However, I have a book for you, and while the plot is quite different, that central relationship has a lot of similarities. The book that I want to recommend with Gilmore Girls is The Extraordinaries by TJ Klune. This follows a gay teen boy who writes fan fiction about a real-life extraordinary. They're basically like superheroes in this world, and he has a crush on one of these extraordinaries who he writes fanfic about. Meanwhile, it's clear to everybody but him that his best friend has been in love with him forever. So things get complicated, and I won't spoil anything other than that because I think it's great. But this was totally my sense of humor. I found it to be laugh out loud funny. It's got awkward situations, it's got a lot of banter, and it does have this great central parent-child relationship. The main character's dad is a cop, and he's definitely straight, and they just have the best relationship. Some of the banter between the two of them made me laugh. His dad will make these like really bad, funny jokes about like gay versus straight, except in this like loving and entertaining dad jokey sort of way, and it's just awesome. They have a great relationship, and because the mom died, he is a single parent. This is the closest thing I could think of that reminded me a little bit of the relationship between Rory and Lorelai. So if you guys like Gilmore Girls, I would recommend maybe trying out The Extraordinaries by TJ Klune. Another one of my all-time favorite shows, which every time I think about it, it makes me want to go back and rewatch it because it's been so long, is Battlestar Galactica. Guys, the show is so good, and again, I was so late to the game with this one. When my husband and I first discovered it, it was already off air, and we had had dinner at some friends' houses, and we're just kind of like browsing some of the stuff they had on their shelves, and they were recommending it, and we were like, okay, cool. We were obsessed, both of us. It's such a good sci-fi show. The twists and the turns, the characters, also the fact that when it was running, it was just post 9/11, and so the way that it's grappling in complex and nuanced ways with issues of terrorism and how we think about outsiders and the political ramifications of that, I just thought this was so good and so smart, and yeah, like Battlestar Galactica is everything. So it's hard to find anything that is going to have quite that level of epic scope, but I did recently read a book that I think comes at least slightly close, and if you like Battlestar Galactica, I think you've got a good shot at enjoying this book. That is Unconquerable Sun by Kate Elliot. This is pitched as a gender-flipped Alexander the Great in space, which is pretty much what it is, and it's really, really fun. It's a multi-perspective space opera that has a lot going on. There's a lot of political intrigue, there's court politics, there's reveals, there's a lot of action, and different characters with interesting relationships to each other. So I think if you liked Battlestar Galactica, this is definitely one worth checking out. Another one of my favorite shows, which I started watching, I think, while season 3 was airing. When I was in college, I caught up via DVD and then watched it in real time, is Lost. Anybody remember this show? This is another one that was so good, and the person in me that likes to put clues together and make predictions about what's going to happen and what the next twist and reveal is going to be was a huge fan of Lost, and I can tell you I still feel very, very proud that there was one big reveal that I predicted like 2 seasons ahead of time. Yeah, it was pretty awesome. But I loved this. Obviously, when you're talking about comparing a book to it, you could go the direction of something where people are on a desert island and have to survive. That's not what I did. Instead, what I found is a book that has similar vibes in terms of the level of complexity of the world that this outsider is coming into and exploring, and the layers of history and secrets and different characters and people and areas that slowly open up to build out the larger world. That element, I think, is captured. Senlin Ascends by Josiah Bancroft. This is such a smart fantasy novel. It follows an introverted headmaster who has recently gotten married, and his wife is this very spunky, vivacious younger woman. So for their honeymoon, they go on a trip to visit the Tower of Babel, which is this huge, wide, tall, nobody knows how tall tower, and each level of the tower is called a ringdom instead of a kingdom, because it's a circular tower, it's a ringdom, and each ringdom is controlled by a different group, has its own political system, has its own legal structure, etc. So they arrive there, and on the very first day, he and his wife are separated and she disappears. And so he has to sort of find his courage and brave the wilds of the Tower of Babel as he ascends through these different ringdoms trying to find his wife. And there are lots of mysteries and different people and politics and things that he goes through that are really interesting. And I am excited to continue on with the series, but I think if you like Lost, you might want to give a try to Senlin Ascends. Another favorite is X-Files. This is definitely another one that I didn't watch when it was on air because conservative parents, but I discovered it as an adult. In fact, I think early on in our marriage, my husband, as a gift, bought me season 1 of this, and I was like nervous, like, oh, is this gonna be too scary for me? And then I was totally into it. We watched all of it. So yeah, X-Files is great. This was a really hard one to pin down though, and I thought about a lot of different books. I'm still not sure that the one I picked is like a perfect fit. I mean, it's not a perfect fit, but I think it captures at least part of this. The central piece of this, right, is the relationship between Mulder and Scully and their relationship in the context of investigating paranormal things, right? And so the book that I decided to go with for this is Lady Midnight by Cassandra Clare. This might seem like an odd choice, but hear me out. In this series, there are murders happening and disappearances happening that need to be investigated. Not all of her series are like this, but this one in particular has this mystery element of it. And one of the central relationships here is between Emma and Julian. And they have this sort of fraught, complicated relationship for a variety of reasons, but they are working together to investigate what's really going on in this series. And of course there are sort of paranormal elements to this. They are themselves shadow hunters, if you guys are familiar with the shadow hunter world. There are vampires, there are warlocks, there's other sort of like paranormal creatures, not aliens maybe, but other things. And so I thought this was actually a pretty good fit. Not exactly like the X-Files, but I think in terms of having that complicated relationship between two main characters who are investigating these phenomena, Lady Midnight is not a bad choice. Okay, next up is a cult classic, a fan favorite, one that was canceled long before it should have been. Yes, that's right, I am talking about Joss Whedon's Firefly. Let's all have a moment of silence for season 2 of Firefly, which never happened. This was so good. Firefly is kind of like Wild West in space. It's got this quirky crew going on all these adventures and misadventures, and it's just so great. But the thing about this is it's fun. The characters really drive it, and I would probably be happy doing nothing with these characters, just like following them on their day-to-day adventures. Now, do we get a lot more action than that? Yeah, usually, but it's really about the characters, and if that's how you also feel about Firefly, then you are probably going to love my book pick. This is The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. This is basically like an even more diverse version of Firefly if there was a little bit less action. And this is where I've seen some reviews where people are like, people compared this to Firefly, it's not like Firefly. Firefly has more action. Yeah, Firefly has more action. Not that there's no action in here, but for this, you do have to enjoy a character-driven story. It's really about the characters. It's this quirky crew on a spaceship having adventures and misadventures in space, and sometimes you're just like spending the day with them as they're shopping in the market and you're learning about different cultures, or they're repairing something on the spaceship that went wrong, and it's just such a great, happy, feel-good sci-fi book. So if you like Firefly, and if you wouldn't mind just spending a week with the crew, even if nothing super exciting was happening all the time, then you should definitely try The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. Switching gears from all of this sci-fi stuff, I also really, really love Downton Abbey. It's so good. My husband loves Downton Abbey, and he usually doesn't like this kind of thing. I might enjoy the BBC miniseries. He usually is like, I'm gonna fall asleep. But Downton Abbey, guys, I think almost anybody can find something to enjoy here. It's so great. It's this sweeping, epic drama. It's got beautiful settings. It's got interesting characters. It's set in this time of great change as the British aristocracy are starting to lose power and figure out what to do financially, and things are changing, and the show goes into World War I, and it's just fantastic. I mean, the theme music still just makes me feel good if I hear it, you know. So the book that I want to recommend to you guys, if you were a fan of Downton Abbey, is The House at Riverton by Kate Morton. So I love Kate Morton. She is one of the few historical fiction writers that is basically an auto-buy for me. I love her books. Her recent book wasn't as much a favorite of mine as her earlier ones, but in general, I really, really love her books. And I think The House at Riverton especially has a lot of similarities to Downton Abbey. What is interesting about her books is she always has multiple timelines that end up intersecting in some way. One that's more modern and one that's more historical, and there's usually some kind of a family secret that gets uncovered. The historical timeline here is set in the early 1920s, following a girl who is working as a servant at this grand house where there is intrigue, there are secrets, there are glittering parties. But then in 1924, something goes very wrong and a young poet commits suicide. In the future timeline, Grace, who was the servant, who was one of the only people who saw what happened on that day, is near the end of her life, living in a nursing home, and is visited by a young film director who wants to make a movie about what happened that summer. And so the narrative slowly unfolds and we find out what happened. It's set during a similar time period, this point of major transition. We're following servants in a grand household, but we're also seeing some of what happens among the elite. So I think if you liked Downton Abbey, you might also really enjoy The House at Riverton. Next is a show that isn't cheesy, isn't melodramatic. Yeah. Do I care? No. I have, in fact, rewatched this in the last few years, and I just still really enjoyed it. This is Roswell. I know there's a remake on. I've seen like one episode of it. I'm sure it's probably great, but I think they're going a very different direction. But the original Roswell, I mean, granted, it was very white. Most things at the time were very white, and this was no different, but I just loved it. The teen angst and the melodrama and the aliens, the secrets and the plots and the things that need to be uncovered. It was just really, really great. So for this, I wanted to find something that had romance as a central theme, but also includes some kind of supernatural or paranormal element to it, and mysteries or secrets or plots that need to be uncovered. And so what I think is a really good comparison, if you liked Roswell, is Slave to Sensation by Nalini Singh. This is the first book in the Psy-Changeling series. These are sort of sci-fi slash paranormal romance. You could call them paranormal because there are like shifters in them, but it's science-based, so it's actually probably more sci-fi. And so in this world, you have the Psy, who are humans who've evolved to have these strong psychic abilities, but they've been conditioned to feel no emotion. And the Changelings, who are shifters of different forms, who primarily live based on instinct and emotion. And so I'm sure you can imagine that this is a romance, at least in the first book, between a Psy and a Changeling and discovering her emotion. But the thing that's really cool about these is there's also these larger overarching plots that have a lot of political machinations and intrigue and secrets and danger and stuff that has to be investigated. So if you liked Roswell, I think you might really enjoy the Psy-Changeling series. Okay, so remember a little bit earlier how I said when I had my second kid, I watched Gilmore Girls and Gossip Girl, and I said Gossip Girl was gonna be on this list? Well, here it is, guys. Gossip Girl is on this list. And again, it's all the drama. Teen angst, dark secrets, hidden agendas. It's really, really fun. And the book that I think is a great fit if you liked Gossip Girl is The 1000th Floor by Katharine McGee. This is basically Gossip Girl, but make it slightly sci-fi. That's pretty much what this is. And it starts with a death, and then the whole book leads up to finding out who died and what happened. It's great. It's set in this futuristic world where there's this enormous tower that is now existing in Central Park. The most wealthy, most elite own suites at the top of the tower. And so this is a multi-perspective book where we have perspectives from some of the elite of society and some of those from the lower levels. This has intrigue and dark secrets and betrayal, forbidden romance. It's really great. It does get a little bit dark as well, but it's super soapy, so if you enjoy Gossip Girl, you will probably also really enjoy The 1000th Floor. Alright, so I know this is a long video, but the final show that I wanted to talk about is a very weird one. And in fact, sometimes when I was watching it, I was like, do I like this? I don't know, but I think I kind of do. That is Twin Peaks. This is a weird show, guys. It's creepy and weird and has some real messed up stuff in it, but it's like you can't look away. It's so fascinating and so intricate. I wish I kind of want to go back and rewatch it. All that to say, I needed to find a book that was also weird and creepy, and I recently read one that I think is a pretty good fit. This is Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno-Garcia. So this is a Gothic horror novel set in 1950s Mexico, following a young woman, I think she's around 24, who goes to this creepy, possibly haunted estate to check on her cousin, who had gotten married to one of the white men who lives at this estate, but had sent a very disturbing letter, and so she's going to check on her cousin. And things slowly begin to go very, very wrong. This one is definitely weird and dark and goes a lot of pretty intense places, but I think if you like Twin Peaks, you will probably like Mexican Gothic as well. This is one that I've been telling people, if you need like content or trigger warnings, check them out. I do mention a lot of them in my Goodreads review, which is linked down below. But you would also need the same thing for Twin Peaks. So as I said, if you like Twin Peaks, you'll probably be fine with Mexican Gothic. And what's great about Mexican Gothic is it also uses the horror in this book to talk about larger issues. While there's a lot of like creepy and super disturbing stuff that happens, it has a satisfying ending for one, but it's also using it as ways to talk about things like racism, colonization of the body, misogyny. So there's a lot of like rich thematic content here within a really good horror story. So if you like Twin Peaks, I would recommend trying Mexican Gothic. Okay, so that maybe took longer than I thought it would, and this is gonna be a bit of a beast to edit, but hopefully this was fun for you guys and interesting. You got to learn a little bit more about my taste in television, and if you share a love of any of these shows with me, you got a book recommendation. So talk to me in the comments down below. Let me know any of your thoughts or feelings on anything I talked about in this video. And for your question of the day, I would love to hear one of two things. Either share with me one of your own favorite shows and maybe a book that you would pair with it, or if you have a different book recommendation for one of these shows, you could leave that in the comments down below as well. If you guys like this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you want to see more. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.